Welcome to Dark Creaky TV. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe for the best Reddit creepypasta stories, perfect for bedtime chills. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to leave a comment. Thank you for joining us and enjoy the story. I don't know how much longer I have. Every breath I take feels like shards of glass ripping through my lungs, and the doctors can't explain why. I wish I could go back to that night, but regrets won't save me now. I'm writing this as a warning. Stay away from Ouija boards. It all started a few months ago. My friends and I were bored one Saturday night, looking for something to do. Jake, ever the thrill seeker, suggested we try the Ouija board he'd recently bought. At first, I laughed it off. I've never been a believer in the supernatural. It all seemed like a bunch of hokey nonsense. But the rest of the group, Sarah, Mike, and Anna, were all for it. Peer pressure and curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed. We set up in Jake's basement. It was your typical horror movie setup. Dim lights, candles, and the old wooden board with its alphabet and numbers laid out before us. We gathered around, placing our fingers lightly on the planchette. Jake took charge, calling out to any spirits who might be present. For a while, nothing happened, and we started to joke around, mocking the whole process. Then, the planchette started to move. At first, we thought one of us was doing it, but it moved with such force and speed that it became clear none of us were in control. The air grew thick and cold, and an oppressive silence settled over the room. Jake asked for the spirit's name, and it spelled out Azazeel. I felt a chill run down my spine. The name felt wrong, like an infection in the air. Jake, unfazed, continued to ask questions. The answers were vague and ominous, speaking of curses and damnation. We should have stopped then, but Jake pushed further, demanding proof of the spirit's power. That's when the lights went out. We were plunged into darkness, and the candles flickered violently before extinguishing. We scrambled for our phones, the only source of light now, and I remember the terror in everyone's eyes. We tried to end the session, but the planchette wouldn't move to goodbye. We were trapped in that basement with whatever we'd summoned. A deep, guttural laugh echoed around us, and then I felt it, a searing pain in my chest. I screamed, clutching at my shirt, feeling like my heart was being torn apart. The others tried to help, but there was nothing they could do. The pain subsided after what felt like an eternity, but I was left with a burning sensation, like an invisible mark on my skin. We finally managed to get the planchette to goodbye, and the lights flickered back on. We left Jake's house in a hurry, each of us rattled to the core. I thought the worst was over, but I was wrong. Over the next few days, I began to feel strange. It started with small things: fatigue, headaches, a general sense of unease. Then it got worse. My skin started to discolor, turning a sickly grey. I lost my appetite and began to waste away. Visits to doctors provided no answers. They ran every test imaginable, but my condition defied all medical explanation. I turned to spiritual help, priests, shamans, anyone who might offer a solution. They all said the same thing: I was cursed. One priest even tried an exorcism, but it did nothing. The symptoms only got worse. My hair began to fall out in clumps, my nails turned black and brittle, and I could feel my body decaying from the inside out. Sleep became impossible. Every night I was tormented by nightmares of a dark, twisted figure watching me from the shadows. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and it whispered promises of eternal suffering. I knew it was Azazel. He had marked me that night, and now he was coming to collect. Desperation drove me to extremes. I tried ancient rituals, obscure chants, anything that might offer relief, but it was all for nothing. My condition continued to deteriorate. The smell of rot clung to me, and I could see the horror in the eyes of those around me. I was a walking corpse, a living testament to the price of meddling with forces beyond comprehension. The worst part is knowing that my soul is damned. I can feel it, a dark presence looming over me, waiting to drag me into the abyss. Every breath is a reminder that I'm living on borrowed time. I don't know how much longer I can hold on, but I needed to share my story before it's too late. Please, if you're reading this, heed my warning. Stay away from Ouija boards. The forces they summon are not to be trifled with. I've learned that the hard way, and now I'm paying the ultimate price. My body is decaying, my soul is damned, and there's nothing anyone can do to save me. The days following my initial symptoms were nothing short of a living nightmare. As my body continued to decay, so did my mind. The once familiar world around me began to distort, transforming into a grotesque reflection of my inner torment. It started with the shadows. They seemed to move of their own accord, creeping along the walls and ceiling, twisting into horrifying shapes. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, a side effect of the constant pain and lack of sleep. But the shadows became more persistent, more aggressive. They whispered to me in a language I couldn't understand, but instinctively knew was malevolent. My friends tried to be supportive, but it was clear they were terrified. Sarah and Mike came by often at first, bringing food and trying to distract me with movies and games. But as my condition worsened, their visits became less frequent. The smell of decay was unbearable, and I could see the revulsion in their eyes, despite their best efforts to hide it. Jake was the most affected. He blamed himself for what happened, and I could see the guilt eating away at him. He spent hours researching ways to reverse the curse, diving into the darkest corners of the internet, seeking out anyone who might have answers. But every lead turned into a dead end. The only consistent message was that I was beyond saving. Anna, the quietest of our group, withdrew completely. She stopped responding to texts and calls, and I heard through mutual friends that she had become a recluse, barely leaving her house. I couldn't blame her. The terror of that night had shattered our bonds, leaving us isolated in our fear. The doctors remained baffled. They ran countless tests, but the results always came back normal. It was as if my body was rotting away without any discernible cause. They referred me to specialists, but each visit was a repeat of the last. Confusion, pity, and ultimately, helplessness. As my physical state deteriorated, my mind began to fracture. I started hearing voices, not just in the shadows, but everywhere. They taunted me, reminding me of my impending doom, laughing at my misery. I would catch glimpses of figures standing at the edge of my vision, only to vanish when I turned to look. One night, I woke to find my bedroom door slowly creaking open. A figure stood in the doorway, shrouded in darkness. Its eyes glowed with a sickly yellow light, and I could feel its gaze piercing through me. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or scream. The figure stepped closer, and I recognized it as the same entity from my nightmares, Azazel. He spoke in a voice that was both a whisper and a roar, filling the room with its presence. "Your soul is mine," he said, and I felt a cold, clammy hand grasp my heart. The pain was unbearable, a searing agony that left me gasping for breath. When I thought I couldn't endure any more, he released me, leaving me trembling and sobbing in the darkness. I knew then that there was no escape. No doctor, priest, or ritual could save me. Azazel had marked me, and he would not rest until he claimed my soul. I was doomed to suffer until my body gave out, and even then, the torment would not end. Desperation led me to confide in my parents, hoping they might offer some solace or solution. They were horrified by my appearance and the story I recounted. They tried to be supportive, but I could see the fear and disbelief in their eyes. They took me to more doctors, more specialists, but the results were always the same. One particularly desperate night, I decided to confront the entity head on. I returned to Jake's house, insisting we use the Ouija board again. Jake was reluctant, but he agreed, hoping we might find some answers. We set up in the basement, just as we had that first night, and began the session. The planchette moved almost immediately, spelling out, "Welcome back." My heart pounded in my chest as I asked why this was happening to me. The response was chilling. "You called, I answered." I demanded to know how to end the curse, but the board spelled out no escape. I was shaking, tears streaming down my face. Jake, in a fit of anger, grabbed the board and smashed it against the wall. The lights flickered, and the room grew icy cold. A deep, guttural laugh echoed around us, the same laugh I had heard that first night. It filled the room, shaking the walls, and I knew Azazel was there, watching, waiting. I could feel his presence, a malevolent force pressing down on me, suffocating me. We fled the house, but the damage was done. I was more certain than ever that my fate was sealed. My body continued to decay, and my mind slipped further into madness. The whispers grew louder, the shadows more aggressive. Sleep became a distant memory, replaced by endless nights of torment. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. The pain is unbearable, and the fear is consuming me. I can feel my soul slipping away, inch by inch, into the darkness. I'm writing this as a final plea. Stay away from Ouija boards. They are not toys. They are gateways to horrors beyond imagination. And once you open that door, there is no closing it. The realization that there was no escape from this curse plunged me into a state of despair. My body, now a mere shadow of its former self, continued to decay at an alarming rate. The smell of rot was ever present, a constant reminder of my impending doom. My days were filled with agony, and my nights were plagued by relentless torment. My parents, despite their best efforts, could do nothing to alleviate my suffering. They took me to countless doctors, each one more perplexed than the last. No medical explanation could account for my condition, and the futility of their attempts only deepened my hopelessness. My mother, a devout Catholic, arranged for priests to visit our home, performing exorcisms and blessings, but none of it made a difference. The priests left, shaking their heads, admitting that they had never encountered anything like this before. The shadows in my room grew darker, more sinister. They moved with a malevolent intent, forming twisted shapes that seemed to reach out for me. The whispers became more coherent, filled with promises of eternal suffering and damnation. I could feel Azazel's presence growing stronger, his grip on my soul tightening with each passing day. Jake and Sarah, still racked with guilt, continued to visit, though their visits were less frequent. They tried to stay positive, to offer comfort, but their efforts were in vain. They couldn't hide their fear and revulsion, and their presence only served to remind me of the hopelessness of my situation. One evening, as I lay in bed, unable to sleep, I felt a cold breeze wash over me. I looked towards the window, but it was closed. The temperature in the room dropped sharply, and I could see my breath forming in the air. A low growl filled the room, and I knew he was here. Azazel's form materialized in the corner, his eyes glowing with a sickly yellow light. His presence was overwhelming, a dark force that pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. He stepped closer, and I could see his twisted, demonic features more clearly. His skin was pale and cracked, like old parchment, and his mouth was filled with sharp, jagged teeth. "You belong to me," he hissed, his voice a harsh whisper that cut through the air like a knife. "There is no escape. Your soul is mine." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The pain in my chest intensified, a burning agony that left me gasping for breath. I could feel his cold hand reaching inside me, gripping my heart. It felt like he was tearing it apart, piece by piece. Tears streamed down my face as I begged for mercy, but Azazel only laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that echoed through the room. He released his grip, and I collapsed onto the bed, shivering and sobbing. The shadows danced around him, growing darker and more twisted, feeding off my fear and despair. "You will suffer," he said, his voice filled with sadistic pleasure. "And when your body gives out, I will take your soul. You are mine, now and forever." With that, he vanished, leaving me alone in the cold, dark room. I lay there for hours, unable to move, the pain slowly subsiding but never truly leaving. I knew then that there was no hope, no escape. Azazel had claimed me and my fate was sealed. The days blurred together, each one filled with unbearable pain and torment. I withdrew from everyone, unable to bear the looks of pity and horror on their faces. My parents tried to keep up a facade of normalcy, but I could see the toll it was taking on them. They were losing hope, just as I had. The nightmares grew more intense, the visions more vivid. I saw myself in a dark, twisted version of my room, surrounded by the shadows that had become my constant companions. Azazel was always there, watching, waiting, his eyes filled with malevolent glee. One night, as I lay in bed, I felt a sharp pain in my chest. It was different this time, more intense, more real. I looked down and saw black veins spreading across my skin, pulsating with a dark energy. The pain was excruciating, unlike anything I had ever felt before. I screamed, but no one came. I was alone in my torment. The black veins continued to spread, covering my body in a web of darkness. I could feel my life force being drained away, sucked into the abyss that Azazel had created. My vision blurred and I knew I was slipping away. In my last moments of consciousness, I saw him standing at the foot of my bed, his eyes glowing with a sickly yellow light. He reached out, and I could feel his cold hand gripping my soul, pulling me into the darkness. "Your soul is mine," he whispered, his voice filled with triumph. There is no escape. As the darkness consumed me, I knew that my fate was sealed. I was damned, forever trapped in Azazel's grasp, my soul condemned to an eternity of suffering, and there was nothing anyone could do to save me. Every day I felt my strength waning, slipping away as if carried by an unseen tide. The black veins that had begun to spread across my body were now a constant reminder of my impending doom. Each pulse brought a wave of agony, a reminder that my time was running out. My parents had reached their breaking point. They were desperate, willing to try anything to save me. They reached out to a renowned spiritual healer, someone with a reputation for dealing with the supernatural. His name was Father Lucius, a man with a stoic demeanor and eyes that seemed to pierce through your very soul. Father Lucius arrived at our home one stormy evening. His presence filled the room with a sense of calm, a stark contrast to the turmoil I had been living in. He examined me with a mix of pity and determination, his hands gentle but firm as he inspected the black veins that had taken over my body. "There is a darkness within you," he said, his voice low and measured, "a curse unlike any I've seen before, but I will do everything in my power to help you." He set up an array of candles and incense, chanting in a language I couldn't understand. The air grew thick with the scent of burning herbs, and the room seemed to pulse with a strange energy. My parents watched anxiously from the doorway, their faces etched with worry. Father Lucius placed his hands on my chest. His eyes closed in concentration. I felt a warmth spread through my body, a stark contrast to the cold that had become my constant companion. For a moment, I dared to hope. But then the shadows in the room began to shift, growing darker and more menacing. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, filling my head with a cacophony of voices. Azazel's presence was overwhelming, a malevolent force that seemed to press down on me from all sides. Father Lucius's face contorted in pain as he struggled against the dark energy. Sweat poured down his face, and his hands shook as he chanted louder, trying to drive the darkness away. But it was no use. The shadows lashed out, striking him with an unseen force and sending him crashing to the floor. I screamed, the black veins pulsing with a dark, malevolent energy. The pain was unbearable, a searing agony that left me writhing in torment. My parents rushed to my side, but there was nothing they could do. Father Lucius struggled to his feet, his face pale and drawn. "This is beyond me," he said, his voice trembling. "The darkness is too strong. I'm sorry, but there's nothing more I can do." Despair washed over me as the reality of my situation set in. I was truly beyond saving. Azazel's grip on my soul was unbreakable, and there was no force on earth that could drive him away. I was condemned to an eternity of suffering, my soul damned to hell. The days that followed were a blur of pain and torment. The black veins continued to spread, covering my entire body in a web of darkness. My vision grew dim, and I could feel my life force slipping away. The nights were the worst. Azazel's presence was always there, a constant weight pressing down on me. His whispers filled my head, promising eternal suffering and damnation. I could see his twisted form in the shadows, his eyes glowing with a sickly yellow light. One night, as I lay in bed, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The pain was still there, but it was muted, as if a heavy weight had been lifted. I knew then that my time was almost up. I looked around the room, taking in the familiar sights one last time. My parents stood by my bedside, their faces etched with sorrow. Jake and Sarah were there too, their eyes filled with guilt and regret. I wanted to say something, to offer them some measure of comfort, but the words wouldn't come. As the darkness closed in, I felt Azazel's presence grow stronger. He was there, waiting to claim my soul. I could feel his cold hand reaching out, gripping my heart. The pain was excruciating, but there was nothing I could do to stop it. With my last breath, I closed my eyes and whispered a silent prayer. Not for myself, but for those I was leaving behind. I hoped they would find peace, and that they would remember me not as a victim of a curse, but as a friend and loved one. The darkness consumed me, and I felt my soul being pulled into the abyss. Azazel's laughter echoed in my ears, a cruel reminder of my fate. I was damned, forever trapped in his grasp, my soul condemned to an eternity of suffering, and there was nothing anyone could do to save me. I awoke in a place of pure darkness. There was no sense of time or space, only an overwhelming void that swallowed everything. I could feel the presence of others, countless souls trapped in the same abyss, their pain and despair mingling with my own. The air was thick with the stench of decay, a constant reminder of my fate. Azazel's voice echoed around me, a sinister whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Welcome to your new home," he said, his tone dripping with sadistic pleasure. "Your suffering has only just begun." I tried to move, but my limbs were heavy, as if weighed down by invisible chains. Every attempt to free myself was met with excruciating pain, a burning sensation that radiated from the black veins still pulsing beneath my skin. I was trapped, bound by the curse that had consumed me. In the darkness, I could see the faint outline of other souls, their forms twisted and contorted by their own torment. Their eyes glowed with a dim, flickering light, reflecting the despair that had taken hold of them. Some were crying out in agony, while others remained silent, their expressions blank and hollow. It was a place of endless suffering where hope had long since died. Time lost all meaning in the abyss. Days, months, years. It was impossible to tell how long I had been there. The pain was a constant, unrelenting presence, a reminder of the curse that had damned me. Azazel would visit me often, his twisted form materializing from the darkness. He took pleasure in my suffering, feeding off my pain and despair. "You brought this upon yourself," he would say, his voice a cruel whisper. "You and your friends opened the door, and now you must pay the price." The memories of my life on Earth began to fade, replaced by the endless torment of the abyss. I could no longer remember the faces of my loved ones, the sound of their voices, the warmth of their touch. All that remained was the pain, the darkness, and the knowledge that I was damned for eternity. In rare moments of clarity, I would reflect on the events that had led me here. The fateful night with the Ouija board, the initial symptoms of my curse, the futile attempts to find a cure. It all seemed like a distant dream, a life that no longer belonged to me. I wondered if my friends and family still thought of me, if they had found a way to move on, or if they were haunted by the memory of my suffering. One day, as I lay in the darkness, I heard a familiar voice. It was faint at first, barely more than a whisper, but it grew stronger, more insistent. It was Jake. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice filled with guilt and sorrow. "I should have never brought that board. I should have listened to you." I tried to respond, to tell him that it wasn't his fault, but the words wouldn't come. My voice was lost in the abyss, just another echo in the void. "I can't change what happened," Jake continued, "but I won't forget you. I'll make sure no one else falls into this trap. I'll warn them, tell them your story. Maybe, in some way, that'll make a difference." His words brought a fleeting sense of solace, a small flicker of hope in the darkness. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me that my suffering hadn't been in vain. If my story could save even one person from this fate, then perhaps there was some meaning to my torment. As the years stretched on, I learned to endure the pain, to find strength in the small moments of clarity. I watched as new souls arrived, each one brought here by their own folly, their own brushes with the supernatural. I tried to reach out to them, to offer what little comfort I could, but the darkness made it difficult. Azazel's grip on us was too strong, his presence too overpowering. Yet, in the depths of my despair, I held on to the hope that one day I might find a way to break free, that somehow I could escape Azazel's grasp and find peace. It was a fragile hope, but it was all I had left. So, I write this final part of my story as a warning to those who may stumble upon it. Stay away from Ouija boards and other tools of the supernatural. The forces they summon are not to be trifled with, and the price of curiosity can be more than you can bear. I am living, or rather, existing, proof of that. My soul may be damned, but perhaps yours can still be saved. Heed my warning, and do not make the same mistake I did. For in the darkness, there is no escape, no redemption, only endless suffering and the cold, unyielding grip of Azazel. My name is Mark, and this is the story of how a simple, curious game with a Ouija board turned into a nightmare that haunts me to this day. It began innocently enough, as these things often do. It was a cold Friday night in November. My friends and I had gathered at my place for a casual hangout. The usual suspects were there. Dave, my best friend since elementary school, Jessica, who always had a knack for the weird and spooky, and Lily, my girlfriend, who thought the whole idea was ridiculous, but came along for the fun. We were bored, flipping through channels and scrolling through our phones, when Jessica suggested we try out the Ouija board she had brought. "Come on, it'll be fun," she said, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "Let's see if we can contact some spirits." I rolled my eyes but agreed, mainly because there was nothing else to do. We gathered around the coffee table, the Ouija board set up in the centre. The candles flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. It felt silly, like a game kids play at a sleepover, but there was an undeniable sense of anticipation in the air. We placed our fingers lightly on the planchette, and Jessica began the usual chant. "Is there anyone here who wishes to speak with us?" For a few minutes, nothing happened. We laughed and teased each other, but then the planchette started to move. At first, I thought one of my friends was pushing it, but their faces told a different story. The planchette moved slowly, deliberately, spelling out Hello. We exchanged nervous glances, but continued. "Who are you?" Jessica asked, her voice trembling slightly. The planchette moved again. Megera, Dave chuckled. Nice try, Jessica. Megara, really? But Jessica's face was pale. I didn't do it, she whispered. Let's keep going. The questions flowed, and the answers grew more unsettling. Megara claimed to be a demon, and the atmosphere grew tense. I felt a chill run down my spine, but dismissed it as nerves. Then, the board spelled out something that made my blood run cold. M-A-R-K. That's not funny, I snapped. Who's doing this? No one answered. The planchette moved again. M-A-R-K-D-E-A-L? I felt a lump in my throat. What do you mean, deal? I asked, trying to sound braver than I felt. The response was slow, deliberate. M-O-N-E-Y-I-N, E-X-C-H-A-N-G-E-F-O-R-Y-O-U-R-E-Y-E. A stunned silence fell over the room. My heart pounded in my chest. This is bullshit, I said, pulling my hand away from the planchette. But Jessica's eyes were wide with fear. Mark, maybe we should stop. Yeah, let's pack it up, Lily agreed, her voice shaking. We quickly put the board away, but the feeling of dread lingered. I couldn't shake off the strange sensation that something had attached itself to me. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. The thought of that message kept replaying in my mind. Money in exchange for your eye. Days went by, and the incident became a distant memory, a weird story to tell at parties. But then things started to happen. It began with small stuff, misplaced items, strange noises, shadows in the corner of my eye. I tried to ignore it, but it kept getting worse. One night, as I was brushing my teeth, I looked in the mirror and saw a shadowy figure standing behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there. My heart raced as I tried to rationalize it, blaming it on stress and lack of sleep. But the figure appeared again the next night, and the night after that. It was always there, just out of sight, watching me. I started to feel like I was going crazy. I told Lily about it, but she just brushed it off, saying it was probably stress from work. Then came the dreams. Horrible, vivid dreams where I was in a dark, endless void, and a voice whispered to me, "Give me your eye, and I will give you everything you desire." I would wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding, unable to shake off the feeling of dread. One night, the dream changed. I was no longer in a void, but in a dimly lit room. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the walls were covered in strange symbols. In the center of the room stood a figure cloaked in darkness. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and it spoke in a voice that seemed to echo in my mind. "Mark, the deal still stands." I woke up with a start, my hands trembling. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get rid of the Ouija board. I called Jessica and told her everything. She was just as freaked out and agreed to help me dispose of it. We drove to a remote spot in the woods and buried the board deep in the ground. I hoped that would be the end of it, but the nightmares didn't stop. The shadowy figure continued to haunt me, whispering the same offer: "Give me your eye, and you will have all the wealth you desire." I started to lose weight. My face grew gaunt, and dark circles formed under my eyes. Lily became worried, but I couldn't tell her the truth. She would think I was insane. Then, one night, I had the worst dream yet. I was back in the dark room, and this time the figure was closer. I could see its face, a grotesque, twisted version of my own. It reached out, its hand cold and clammy, and touched my face. "Do it, Mark. Give me your eye." I woke up screaming, clutching my face. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to make it stop. In a moment of sheer desperation, I grabbed a kitchen knife and stood in front of the bathroom mirror. My reflection looked back at me, gaunt and hollow-eyed. "Do it," the voice whispered in my mind. "Do it, and it will all be over." My hand shook as I raised the knife to my eye. Tears streamed down my face as I tried to resist, but the voice grew louder, more insistent. "Do it, Mark. You have no choice." I screamed and dropped the knife, collapsing to the floor. I couldn't do it. I couldn't gouge out my own eye. But I knew I had to do something, or I would lose my mind completely. The next morning, I packed a bag and left town. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just needed to get away, to clear my head. I drove for hours, finally stopping at a small, run-down motel in the middle of nowhere. I thought I could escape it, but that night, the figure appeared again, more menacing than ever. "You can't run from me, Mark," it hissed. "The deal still stands." I broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. I was trapped, with no way out. The only way to end it was to give in to the voice's demands. And so, with a heavy heart and trembling hands, I picked up the knife once more. I don't know how long I sat there, knife in hand, the cold steel pressing against my skin. It felt like hours, maybe days, as I fought the urge to give in. The shadowy figure stood over me, a smirk etched on its ghastly face. "You know what you have to do, Mark," it whispered, its voice echoing in my mind. In a moment of clarity, I decided I couldn't go through with it. I couldn't gouge out my own eye, no matter how desperate I was. I needed help. I needed to find someone who could understand what I was going through. I put the knife down and grabbed my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found Jessica's number. I hesitated for a moment before hitting call. "Mark?" Jessica's voice was groggy, probably woken up by my late-night call. "What's wrong?" "I need your help," I said, my voice shaking. "It's the Ouija board. It's not over. I can't take it anymore." Jessica was silent for a moment before replying. "Come over. We'll figure this out." I drove to Jessica's house, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The shadowy figure sat in the passenger seat, grinning at me. "You can't escape me, Mark," it taunted. When I arrived, Jessica was waiting at the door, her face pale with worry. She led me inside, and I poured out everything that had happened since we buried the board. She listened intently, her eyes wide with fear and concern. "We need to find a way to break the connection," she said finally. "There has to be something we can do." We spent the next few hours researching online, poring over articles and forums about Ouija boards and demonic possessions. Most of it was useless, but then Jessica found something that seemed promising, a ritual to sever ties with a malevolent spirit. "It says here we need to gather specific items and perform the ritual at the place where we buried the board," she explained. "It's supposed to banish the spirit and break any deals it made." I was willing to try anything at this point. We made a list of the items we needed: salt, candles, a mirror, and a few other obscure things. We drove around town, gathering everything, and then headed back to the woods where we had buried the board. The air was thick with tension as we set up for the ritual. The shadowy figure followed us, its presence growing stronger with each step we took. "This won't work, Mark," it hissed. "You can't get rid of me that easily." Jessica drew a circle of salt around the spot where we buried the board and placed the candles at each cardinal point. She lit them, and their flickering light cast eerie shadows among the trees. I held the mirror, my hands trembling as we began the chant we had found online. "Spirits of the dark, we call upon thee. Release this soul, let him be free. Sever the ties, break the chains. Let this entity feel no pain." The wind picked up, and the flames of the candles danced wildly. The shadowy figure snarled, its eyes glowing with anger. "This is pointless, Mark. You belong to me." But we continued, our voices growing louder and more desperate. The ground beneath us began to tremble, and a cold, icy wind whipped around us. The figure howled in rage, its form flickering like a dying flame. "Release this soul. Let him be free. Sever the ties. Break the chains. Let this entity feel no pain," we chanted over and over, our voices blending with the howling wind. Suddenly, there was a blinding flash of light, and the figure let out a blood-curdling scream. It writhed and twisted, its form dissolving into the air like smoke. The wind died down, and the candles flickered out, leaving us in darkness. I collapsed to the ground, my body shaking with relief and exhaustion. "Did it work?" I whispered, afraid to believe it. Jessica knelt beside me, her face pale but determined. "I think so. I don't feel its presence anymore." We sat there for a while, letting the silence wash over us. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of peace. The nightmare was over, or so I thought. As we made our way back to the car, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was still watching me. I brushed it off, convincing myself it was just my nerves. But that night, as I lay in bed, the shadowy figure appeared once more, its eyes glowing with a sinister light. "You can't escape me, Mark," it whispered. "The deal still stands." I bolted upright, my heart pounding. I knew then that the ritual hadn't worked. The deal was still in place. And the only way to end this nightmare was to give in to its demands. The next morning, I woke up determined to find another way. I couldn't give up my eye, but there had to be something else I could do. I spent the day researching, reaching out to experts in the paranormal field, and even considering visiting a priest. As the sun set, I found myself back at the motel, feeling more defeated than ever. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The shadowy figure stood behind me, its eyes glowing with anticipation. "You know what you have to do, Mark," it whispered. "Give me your eye, and it will all be over." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "No, there has to be another way." The figure's grin widened. "You have until midnight. If you don't comply, I will take it myself." Panic set in as I realized my time was running out. I couldn't let it win, but I didn't know what else to do. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, I felt a growing sense of dread. And then, at the stroke of midnight, the shadowy figure lunged at me, its cold hands gripping my face. I screamed as it dug its fingers into my eye socket, the pain unbearable. I struggled, trying to break free, but its grip was too strong. With a final desperate effort, I grabbed the knife from the bedside table and plunged it into the figure's chest. It let out a blood-curdling scream and vanished, leaving me gasping for breath and clutching my bleeding eye. I collapsed to the floor, my vision blurry and my body trembling. The pain was excruciating, but I felt a strange sense of relief. The shadowy figure was gone, and I had managed to keep my eye. As I lay there, drifting in and out of consciousness, I heard a voice whisper in my ear, "The deal is not broken, Mark. This is just the beginning." I woke up in a hospital bed, my head wrapped in bandages, and the sterile smell of antiseptic filling the air. My eye throbbed with pain, and the events of the previous night came rushing back. The shadowy figure, the knife, the unbearable agony. It all felt like a nightmare, but the dull ache in my eye socket reminded me it was all too real. A nurse noticed I was awake and hurried over. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her voice gentle but concerned. "Like I got hit by a truck," I muttered, wincing as I tried to sit up. "What happened? How did I get here?" "You were found unconscious in your motel room," she explained. "The paramedics brought you in. You were in pretty bad shape, but you're lucky. The damage to your eye wasn't as severe as it could have been." I nodded, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. Maybe, just maybe, the worst was over. But as soon as the thought crossed my mind, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The deal wasn't broken. The figure's words echoed in my mind. This is just the beginning. Over the next few days, I recovered slowly. Lily visited me, her face etched with worry. She asked what had happened, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. Instead, I concocted a story about being attacked by a burglar. She seemed skeptical, but didn't press further. Once I was discharged from the hospital, I knew I had to find a permanent solution. The figure's presence was weaker, but I could still feel it lurking in the shadows, waiting for its chance to strike again. I decided to visit a renowned paranormal expert named Dr. Elaine Harper. She had a reputation for dealing with cases like mine, and I hoped she could help me break the deal once and for all. Dr. Harper's office was filled with strange artifacts and ancient books. She was a middle-aged woman with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through me. As I recounted my story, she listened intently, nodding occasionally. "You're dealing with a powerful entity," she said finally. "Megara is a demon known for making Faustian bargains, deals that come with a heavy price. The fact that you haven't lost your eye yet is a testament to your willpower, but the deal isn't broken. It's only a matter of time before Megara returns." "Is there anything I can do?" I asked. desperation creeping into my voice. Dr. Harper leaned back in her chair, her eyes thoughtful. There is a way, but it's risky. We need to perform a counter-ritual to nullify the deal. It will require a significant sacrifice on your part, but it's your best chance. I swallowed hard, the fear evident in my eyes. What kind of sacrifice? Your blood, she said bluntly. Not your life, but enough to appease the entity and sever the bond. We'll also need specific items, a black candle, graveyard dirt, and a personal item of Megara's. How am I supposed to get something that belongs to a demon? I asked, feeling hopeless. Dr. Harper smiled slightly. Demons often leave traces of themselves in the objects they use to make deals. In your case, the Ouija board might contain enough of Megara's essence to work. I felt a glimmer of hope. We buried the board in the woods. I'll get it. That night, Jessica and I returned to the woods. The air was thick with tension as we dug up the board. I felt a strange sense of dread as we unearthed it, the wood still stained with the remnants of our previous encounter. We brought the board to Dr. Harper, who examined it carefully. "This will do," she said. "Now we need to perform the ritual at midnight in a place of power. There's an old cemetery on the outskirts of town that should suffice." As midnight approached, we gathered the necessary items and headed to the cemetery. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the gravestones. We set up the ritual in the center of the cemetery, the black candle flickering in the wind. Dr. Harper instructed me to draw a circle of graveyard dirt around us and place the Ouija board in the center. She then handed me a ceremonial knife. "You'll need to cut your palm and let your blood drip onto the board," she said. "I'll guide you through the rest." My hands trembled as I made the cut, the pain sharp but fleeting. I held my hand over the board, watching as my blood dripped onto the wood. Dr. Harper began to chant in a language I didn't understand, her voice low and rhythmic. The air grew colder, and I felt a familiar presence. The shadowy figure appeared at the edge of the circle, its eyes glowing with anger. "This won't work, Mark," it hissed. "You belong to me." I ignored it, focusing on Dr. Harper's words. The candle's flame grew brighter, and the ground beneath us trembled. The figure howled in rage, trying to break through the circle, but it was held back by some unseen force. "Repeat after me," Dr. Harper instructed. "I, Mark, renounce the deal made with Megara. I offer my blood as payment to sever the bond." I repeated her words, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. The figure screeched, its form flickering and distorting. Dr. Harper continued the chant, her voice growing louder. "By the power of the spirits, I command thee, Megara, to release this soul and return to the void from whence you came." The figure writhed, its form dissolving into smoke. I felt a searing pain in my eye as the bond was broken. With a final, agonized scream, the figure vanished, leaving us in silence. I collapsed to the ground, my body trembling with exhaustion. Dr. Harper knelt beside me, her face pale but relieved. "It's done," she said softly. "The bond is broken." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The nightmare was finally over. As we gathered our things and left the cemetery, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace for the first time in months. But as we drove away, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something still wasn't right. The deal was broken, but at what cost? I had given my blood, my sanity, and almost my eye to escape the demon's grasp. Would there be repercussions? Only time would tell. For now, I was free. Free from the shadowy figure that had haunted me, free from the nightmares that had plagued my nights. But deep down, I knew that the memory of Megara would never truly leave me. The days following the ritual were a blur of relief and exhaustion. I returned home, feeling like I had finally reclaimed my life. Jessica and Lily were supportive, helping me recover both physically and mentally. The shadowy figure was gone, and the nightmares ceased. It felt like a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. But there were scars. The cut on my palm healed, but the psychological wounds were deeper. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting the figure to reappear. Every creak, every shadow sent a jolt of fear through me. I couldn't shake off the paranoia. Lily tried to help, suggesting therapy and ways to relax, but nothing seemed to work. I became distant, losing myself in my thoughts. One night, while lying in bed, I noticed a faint whisper in my ear. It was so subtle that I thought I imagined it, but then it came again, clearer this time. "Mark, you can't escape me." I sat up, my heart racing. The room was dark, but I could feel a presence. I fumbled for the light, and as it flickered on, I saw nothing. No shadowy figure, no glowing eyes, just an empty room. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, a lingering fear from the ordeal. But the whispers continued. They were always faint, just on the edge of hearing, but they were there. During the day, at night, in the middle of conversations, I couldn't escape them. They were a constant reminder of what I had faced and what might still be lurking. Desperate, I called Dr. Harper and told her about the whispers. She was concerned, but offered little comfort. "The bond is broken, but the trauma remains," she explained. "You need to heal mentally and emotionally. It will take time. Time." That was the one thing I felt I didn't have. The whispers grew more frequent, and soon I started seeing fleeting glimpses of the shadowy figure in my peripheral vision. I was losing my grip on reality. One night, as I was lying in bed, I heard a whisper that was different from the others. It was clearer, more distinct. "Mark, the bargain isn't complete." I bolted upright, my heart pounding. I knew then that Megara wasn't gone. The ritual had weakened the bond, but it hadn't destroyed it. I had to find a permanent solution. I couldn't live like this, haunted by whispers and shadows. I decided to delve deeper into the occult, seeking knowledge that might help me end this nightmare once and for all. Jessica was reluctant to help at first, but she saw my desperation and agreed. We visited every occult shop, every mystical library we could find, searching for answers. Our journey led us to an old, secluded bookstore run by a man named Mr. Graves. He was a tall, gaunt man with piercing eyes that seemed to see right through me. "You seek to banish a demon," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "A dangerous endeavour, but not impossible." He led us to a back room filled with ancient tomes and mystical artifacts. After hours of searching, he handed me a book bound in dark leather. "This contains the knowledge you seek, but be warned, the path is perilous. The final ritual requires great sacrifice." I took the book, feeling a mix of hope and dread. As we left the bookstore, Jessica looked at me with concern. "Mark, are you sure about this? You've already been through so much." "I have no choice," I replied. "I need to end this, once and for all." Back home, I pored over the book, studying every detail. The final ritual was complex and dangerous, involving elements I barely understood, but it promised to sever the bond completely, banishing Megara forever. The night of the ritual, Jessica and Lily insisted on being there to support me. We set up the ritual in my basement, the air thick with tension. The instructions were clear. A circle of protection, symbols drawn in my blood, and incantations spoken at the stroke of midnight. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, I felt a growing sense of dread. The whispers were louder, more insistent, and the shadowy figure appeared at the edge of the circle, its eyes burning with hatred. "You can't win, Mark," it hissed. "The deal will never be broken." Ignoring the figure, I began the incantation, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. The air grew cold, and the candles flickered wildly. Jessica and Lily stood outside the circle, their faces pale with worry. As I spoke the final words, the ground trembled, and a blinding light filled the room. The figure howled in rage, its form distorting and flickering. I felt a searing pain in my chest, as if my very soul was being torn apart. With a final, agonized scream, the figure vanished, leaving the room in darkness. I collapsed to the ground, my body trembling with exhaustion. The pain was unbearable, but I felt a strange sense of relief. The bond was broken, and Megara was gone. Jessica and Lily rushed to my side, their faces etched with concern. "Mark, are you okay?" Jessica asked, her voice shaking. I nodded weakly. tears streaming down my face. "It's over," I whispered. "It's finally over." The aftermath of the final ritual left me physically and emotionally drained. I spent the next few days recovering, my body aching and my mind struggling to comprehend everything that had happened. The whispers were gone, and the shadowy figure no longer haunted my vision. For the first time, in what felt like an eternity, I was free. Lily and Jessica stayed by my side, their presence a comforting reminder that I wasn't alone. They had witnessed the worst of it, and still stood by me, offering their unwavering support. It was a testament to their friendship and love that I managed to hold on to my sanity through it all. But the relief was short-lived. One night, as I was lying in bed, I felt a familiar chill creep over me. My heart pounded as I sat up, my eyes scanning the room for any sign of Megara. There was nothing, just the oppressive silence. I tried to convince myself it was just a residual fear, a lingering trauma, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sensation in my chest, a dull ache that wouldn't go away. I brushed it off, attributing it to the stress of the past few weeks. But as the day went on, the pain grew worse. By evening, it was unbearable, a searing agony that radiated through my entire body. I called Jessica, my voice trembling with fear. "Something's wrong. I don't know what's happening, but it feels like I'm being torn apart from the inside." Jessica arrived within minutes, her face etched with worry. "We need to get you to Dr. Harper," she said, helping me to her car. The drive to Dr. Harper's office felt like an eternity, the pain intensifying with each passing second. Dr. Harper's expression grew grave as she examined me. "The ritual severed the bond, but it left a mark on your soul," she explained. "Megara's influence is still there, festering like an infection. We need to cleanse it, but it won't be easy." She prepared a series of rituals, each more complex and exhausting than the last. The process was grueling, pushing me to the brink of my endurance. Each ritual seemed to draw out the dark energy left by Megara, purging it from my body and mind. But with each step, the pain grew worse, as if the demon was fighting back with everything it had. One night, after a particularly brutal ritual, I collapsed on the floor of Dr. Harper's office, my body convulsing with pain. Jessica and Lily were by my side, their faces pale with fear. "Mark, you need to hold on," Jessica urged, her voice breaking. "We're almost there." I nodded weakly, trying to muster the strength to continue. The final ritual was the most dangerous, a desperate attempt to cleanse my soul once and for all. Dr. Harper warned me that it could be fatal, but I had no choice. I couldn't live with this agony any longer. The night of the final ritual, we gathered in a secluded clearing in the woods, far from prying eyes. Dr. Harper drew a complex circle of symbols on the ground, surrounding it with candles and ancient talismans. She handed me a vial of a strange, glowing liquid. "Drink this. It will help you endure the pain." I swallowed the liquid, its bitter taste burning my throat. As Dr. Harper began the incantation, I felt a surge of energy course through my body, a fierce, burning sensation that seemed to ignite every nerve. The pain was excruciating, but I forced myself to stay conscious, focusing on the ritual. The air grew thick with tension, the wind howling around us as Dr. Harper's voice rose in intensity. I could feel Megara's presence, a dark, malevolent force fighting to remain anchored to my soul. The ground trembled, and the candles flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows on the trees. As Dr. Harper spoke the final words, a blinding light filled the clearing, and I felt a violent tug in my chest. The pain reached an unbearable peak, and I screamed, my body writhing in agony. The light grew brighter, enveloping me completely, and then suddenly, it was gone. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. The pain had vanished, replaced by a profound sense of peace. I lay there, tears streaming down my face, as Jessica and Lily rushed to my side. "It's over," Dr. Harper said softly, her voice filled with relief. The bond is broken, and your soul is cleansed. I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. I had survived. I was free. The nightmare was finally over. The weeks that followed were a period of healing and reflection. The scars, both physical and emotional, would take time to fade, but I knew I was on the path to recovery. Jessica and Lily were my anchors, helping me rebuild my life one step at a time. As I sat on my porch one evening, watching the sunset, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. I had faced the darkness and emerged on the other side, scarred but stronger. The experience had changed me, but it had also taught me the value of friendship, resilience, and the indomitable human spirit. The whispers were gone. The shadows no longer haunted me, and for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. The price I had paid was steep, but it had brought me a deeper understanding of myself and the strength to face whatever lay ahead. As the last rays of sunlight faded into the night, I knew that I would never forget the horrors I had endured. But I also knew that I had the power to overcome them, to reclaim my life and move forward, one step at a time.